A palace insider has revealed something the monarchy is trained to bury, a secret Regency plan, one that allegedly favours Catherine. And that detail is detonating nerves for one reason: Regency isn't gossip. It's power. It's who signs, who controls access, who becomes the face of stability when the crown is under strain. If Catherine's name is central to a plan like this, it means Charles has been preparing for a scenario the public isn't supposed to imagine. And someone inside decided it was time to force the truth into daylight. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Because the word Regency is one of the most loaded words the palace can hear. It doesn't mean drama. It doesn't mean rumour. It means authority, real authority with consequences that reach beyond family. It means continuity decisions made in advance. It means control of the diary, the briefings, the signatures, the approvals, the permissions. It means the difference between a monarchy that looks steady and a monarchy that looks uncertain. And when an insider claims there's a plan at all, it suggests something chilling. The palace has already considered a scenario where normal leadership becomes complicated. That's why the word secret matters. Plans exist in many institutions, but secrecy is an admission that the institution fears what the public would do with the knowledge. It's fear of destabilization, fear of succession questions, fear of headlines that spiral into legitimacy debates. Because the moment the public hears Regency, it starts asking why. What happened? What could happen? What are they preparing for? The palace does not like questions that multiply, because multiplying questions lead to multiplying theories, and theories lead to panic. So secrecy becomes the shield, not because it's villainous, but because the institution believes stability is fragile. The insider's credibility is framed as close access, not speculation, and that detail is what makes this feel like more than a tabloid whisper. Insiders don't talk about trigger conditions and name lists unless they've seen the language, heard the conversations, touched the edges of the planning. This is framed as the kind of leak that comes from someone who knows the internal rhythm, someone who understands what gets written down, what gets quietly circulated, and what is never supposed to escape the building. And then comes the detail that makes the story explosive: Catherine being favoured. Not mentioned, not included, favoured. That word implies deliberate positioning, not coincidence. It suggests there were options, and a choice was made. A preference. A decision. In a monarchy that prides itself on protocol, preference is power. It suggests that Catherine's role isn't only emotional support for William, it's structural value to the institution. It suggests the palace believes she is essential to stability in a way that can be operationalized, formalized, relied on. Immediately, tension ignites because different camps interpret it in opposite ways. Some will see it as protection, the palace choosing the most trusted figure to steady the public in a crisis. Others will see it as betrayal, proof that certain voices are being elevated while others are being quietly diminished. In royal life, every elevation creates a shadow. If Catherine is favoured, someone else feels threatened. Someone else feels sidelined. And when people feel sidelined in a system built on hierarchy, they don't stay silent. They maneuver. Foreshadowing makes it feel even more real. A recent small change in roles and visibility hinted at this shift. Not a dramatic announcement, but a subtle recalibration, the kind the palace always uses before it admits anything publicly. Small changes are how the institution tests the waters. They adjust who is seen, who is heard, who is placed near the center of key moments. They shift emphasis gently, so it looks like natural evolution instead of crisis response. If Catherine's presence has been quietly reinforced lately, the leak suggests it wasn't random, it was preparation. And then the cliffhanger lands like a cold object on the table. The leak suggests a document exists with names and triggers. That is where rumor becomes terror. Because documents are receipts. Documents imply procedures, conditions, timelines. They imply a plan that could be activated, not just discussed. And if such a document exists, it means the palace has already imagined what would happen if X occurs and decided Y will follow. That's not gossip. That's governance. The reason this story hits so hard is because it reveals how institutions actually behave. They plan for uncertainty even while projecting permanence. They draft safeguards while selling confidence. And if Catherine is central to the plan, then her role is not just symbolic, it's strategic. It's the palace quietly admitting who it believes can hold the public together when uncertainty threatens to pull everything apart. But to understand why Catherine would be favoured in a regency plan, you have to understand what the palace fears most: an heir who looks unready and a monarchy that looks unstable. The public sees Catherine as a future queen. Insiders say the palace sees her as something sharper, a stability asset. In a crisis, optics become oxygen, and Catherine is the one figure who can calm chaos without saying a word. That's why this alleged regency plan feels so deliberate. Because it isn't just about William. It's about the person beside him, the one the public trusts, the one the institution can't afford to lose, and the one certain people fear most when power shifts. Because Catherine's value, in the cold logic of an institution, isn't only charm or popularity. It's trust, it's tone, it's continuity. When things shake, people look for something familiar and steady. Something that doesn't feel like panic. Something that doesn't feel like a sudden change of regime. Catherine has become that for a huge portion of the public, an anchor figure who absorbs chaos and reflects calm back out. Insiders whisper that in palace meetings, that kind of public trust is treated like strategic protection, the same way security protocols are treated like protection. Not emotional, operational. And the palace evaluates crisis figures differently than it evaluates normal royals. In normal times, roles can be shared, appearances can be rotated, the machine can rely on tradition and routine. In crisis, the machine relies on confidence. It asks a brutal question: who can stand in the light without triggering doubt? Who can be seen and not cause the public to imagine collapse? Who can step forward and make it look like continuity rather than crisis management? Insiders say Catherine is one of the few names that answers that question cleanly. That's why favouring Catherine signals a plan to stabilise perception quickly. Not because the institution wants to crown her early in public imagination, but because it understands how quickly a narrative can spiral. A regency plan is not just paper, it's timing. It's what the public sees, when they see it, and how it feels. Catherine's presence, insiders claim, is seen as a stabilizing force that buys time. Time for decisions. Time for adjustments. Time for the monarchy to keep breathing while it solves problems the public isn't supposed to notice. But the emotional cost is the part no one talks about openly. Catherine becomes symbol and shield simultaneously. She becomes the comforting face that calms the public while the institution behind her negotiates power, procedure, and fear. And that is a heavy role, because a shield gets hit first. If the monarchy faces uncertainty, Catherine becomes both the reassurance and the target, praised by the public, questioned by rivals, watched by insiders who fear what her rising influence means for their own access. Foreshadowing creeps in through whispers that Catherine's behind-the-scenes authority has been increasing. Not loudly, not with announcements, with subtle shifts, more involvement in key decisions, more influence over timing and visibility, more weight in internal discussions that used to revolve around older patterns of hierarchy. It's the kind of change the palace rarely admits, because admitting it invites questions about why it was necessary. But insiders claim those subtle shifts match the logic of a regency plan, strengthen the stabilizer before you need her. And the cliffhanger is the part that makes this story feel dangerous. Rather than flattering, some insiders claim this preference was argued over internally. That means it wasn't automatic. It wasn't universally accepted. It means there were competing visions, competing loyalties, and competing fears. Some may have pushed for Catherine because she's trusted. Others may have resisted because her positioning reduces their influence, closes their doors, shifts the center of gravity away from older power networks. In palace politics, the person who calms the public can threaten the people who depend on internal chaos to keep their relevance. So if Catherine is favored, it isn't just because she's admired, it's because she's effective, and effectiveness is terrifying to those who survive on ambiguity. A stabilizer makes everything clearer, clearer roles, clearer hierarchy, clearer control. That's why certain people would fear her in a power shift, not because she's aggressive, but because she's steady. And in a monarchy built on subtlety, steadiness can become its own kind of authority. And if Catherine is being positioned as the stabilizer, it raises a darker question: who is being quietly sidelined, and why? In the monarchy, every elevation creates a shadow someone who feels diminished. If the Regency plan favors Catherine, insiders whisper it doesn't just empower her, it redraws the map, it narrows access, it reduces competing influence. And that is why it's explosive, not because Catherine is controversial, but because her rise makes certain doors close for good. The palace may call it stability. Others will call it a purge dressed as protocol. Because favoring doesn't mean applause or flattering headlines. It means proximity to decision-making. It means who gets briefed first, who is in the room when the tone is set, who becomes the quiet filter between chaos and the crown. If Catherine is positioned closer to that center, then the people who relied on old access feel the air change immediately. Courtiers who built influence through closeness. Camps who shaped narratives through proximity. Royals who assumed their status guaranteed a voice. Suddenly, nothing is guaranteed. The map shifts, and the shift is silent, which makes it more frightening. Potential losers begin to appear in whispers, not because they are villains, but because they are invested. Some relied on being the trusted voice. Some relied on being the gatekeeper. Some relied on being the person who could walk in without appointment and still be heard. But a Regency plan that favors Catherine implies a narrowed pipeline, a tighter circle, a system that prioritizes calm authority over competing influence. And for people who thrived on open corridors, tightened doors feel like exile. That is where whispered sabotage begins. Not open war, quiet pressure tactics. Leaks designed to weaken trust. Narratives planted to make Catherine seem overreaching rather than stabilizing. The subtle framing shifts. Ambitious, controlling, too central. Anything to make her rise feel uncomfortable, because discomfort is the first step toward resistance. Insiders hint that pressure starts building around her image precisely because her image is the institution's shield. Crack the shield, and you crack the plan. Foreshadowing shows up in the smallest, most telling ways: sudden shifts in invitations, briefings that used to happen through one channel now happening through another, certain people not being seen as much, not appearing where they used to appear, not being referenced the way they were referenced before. These changes are never announced, they're felt. And in palace life, what is felt often matters more than what is said. Then the cliffhanger sharpens the tension. The insider hints one name reacted with panic. Panic doesn't mean guilt. Panic means fear of losing position, fear of being locked out, fear that this isn't temporary, fear that once Catherine becomes central to a crisis structure, she will remain central afterward. Because crisis arrangements have a habit of becoming permanent for safety, and for safety is the most powerful justification in any institution. The emotional stakes become messy because Catherine can be seen in two ways at once: protector and threat. Protector of stability, protector of continuity, protector of the monarchy's future. But threat to those who depended on old hierarchies, old access routes, old influence networks. That's why the story feels like it's pulsing with rivalry even if no one admits it. Because when the system moves, people either adjust or they fight to stop the movement. But the most chilling part isn't the rivalry, it's the trigger condition that would activate the plan. Regency plans don't exist for fun. They exist for thresholds moments when the institution decides the risk is too high to improvise. Insiders claim the plan includes triggers, conditions that would quietly shift authority without the public realizing what changed. That's why this leak feels terrifying. Because it suggests the palace has already modeled the worst-case scenario and written the script in advance. And once a script exists, someone can choose to run it. The triggers are implied in the way insiders talk: incapacity concerns, prolonged absence, major event risk moments when the crown cannot afford uncertainty in public view. And the palace, historically, prefers silent transitions over public explanations, because explanations create debate. Debate creates anxiety. Anxiety creates instability. So instead of dramatic announcements, the palace builds systems where authority can slide quietly, like a door closing without a slam. Foreshadowing deepens when recent schedule and visibility adjustments begin matching what insiders call pre-trigger behavior. More controlled appearances, more careful wording, more strategic placement of key figures. The sort of quiet preparation that looks like normal planning until you realize it's rehearsing a contingency. And the cliffhanger grows darker with the idea that a timeline exists, an internal if X happens, then Y flow that turns uncertainty into procedure. That's the terrifying part. Procedure doesn't hesitate. Procedure executes. Emotionally, it becomes a conflict between protecting the monarch's dignity and protecting continuity. The palace wants to honor Charles without exposing vulnerability. But continuity is ruthless. Continuity demands readiness. Continuity demands a plan that can move even if the human being at the center is struggling. And if the public learned that triggers exist, real triggers, succession anxiety would ignite instantly, because it would confirm the palace is preparing for possibilities it refuses to discuss. And once the trigger logic is understood, the plan stops being theoretical and becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. The leak itself is the second story. Because people don't expose Regency planning unless they want something, insiders whisper two possibilities. This is a whistleblower trying to prevent manipulation, or a strategic player trying to force the palace into a public posture it can't control. Either way, the result is the same: panic behind closed doors. Because now the monarchy isn't just preparing for a crisis, it's defending itself from the idea that it was preparing at all. Because leaking a Regency plan is a nuclear option in royal life. It isn't a casual tip. It isn't gossip thrown into the wind. It's the kind of revelation that implies documentation, procedure, triggers, names everything the palace tries to keep sealed, because it turns continuity into a conversation instead of an assumption. Once the public hears the word Regency, it doesn't just wonder what's happening. It wonders what has been happening. It wonders who knew. It wonders who planned. And those questions don't fade, they grow teeth. That's why insiders split the motive into two dangerous possibilities. The whistleblower angle says the leak is an act of prevention, an attempt to stop a quiet coup, a manipulation, a behind-the-scenes power shift disguised as protocol. In that version, the insider believes sunlight is the only defense. That if Catherine is being favored, people deserve to know why, and they deserve to know who else was trying to steer the plan for their own interests. The whistleblower isn't trying to destroy the monarchy, they're trying to stop the wrong people from using it as a weapon. But the strategic player angle is darker and more cynical. In that version, the leak is timed not to protect transparency, but to force outcomes. To accelerate Catherine's rise, to damage a rival camp, to corner Charles into confirming or denying something he was never ready to discuss publicly, to push the institution into a posture where it can't move quietly anymore. Because once a plan is exposed, the palace loses its favorite advantage: the ability to change reality behind closed doors while pretending nothing changed at all. Foreshadowing sits in the timing. Insiders whisper the leak wasn't random, it was released during a sensitive week. A delicate window, a moment where the palace was already stretched thin. That's when a leak becomes more than information. It becomes leverage. The kind that forces urgent meetings, tighter briefings, and desperate internal loyalty checks. And then comes the cliffhanger that makes everyone inside the building go cold. The insider hints they have receipts, notes, draft language, names. Receipts mean the story can't be dismissed as wild speculation. Receipts mean someone could prove procedure exists. The emotional stakes inside the palace explode quietly. Fear, guilt, loyalty tests among staff. Fear of being blamed. Guilt for knowing something and staying silent. Loyalty tested not just to individuals, but to the institution's survival instinct. Because when a Regency plan is exposed, the palace doesn't just worry about public reaction. It worries about internal fractures, about who will align with whom when power is questioned. But the moment the leak hits, the palace does what it always does: containment, distraction, and narrative control. The palace can survive rumors. What it struggles to survive is a rumor that sounds like procedure. Because procedure feels true. Insiders say containment activates immediately, fewer briefings, stricter language, and a sudden effort to make the story look ridiculous without ever denying it. That's the trick. If you deny too strongly, you confirm panic. If you ignore it, you let it grow. So the palace does what it does best. It manages the air itself. Internal memos tighten who can speak and what words are allowed. The vocabulary becomes controlled, disciplined, sanitized. Friendly briefings are deployed to reframe the story as misinterpretation without ever touching the heart of the claim. Because the palace wants plausible distance, it wants the public to feel the story is silly, while the institution refuses to create a single quote that can be replayed as confirmation. Then the counterleaks begin, carefully placed confusion designed to muddy timelines and credibility. If the palace can't erase the story, it can blur it, make people argue over details, make the source look unreliable, make the timing look suspicious, turn a procedural-sounding claim into a messy debate about motives and personalities. That's how institutions protect themselves, not by proving truth, but by drowning it in noise. Foreshadowing sharpens when a staff member is quietly removed from proximity, not announced, not explained, just moved. The kind of internal shift that signals suspicion has a target. Someone is believed to be too close to the leak, too loose with language, too connected to the wrong camp. And once staff are repositioned, the palace is no longer simply managing a narrative, it's hunting risk inside its own walls. The cliffhanger deepens with the idea that a document becomes the most dangerous object in the building. A piece of paper with names and triggers, if it exists, doesn't just confirm planning, it confirms intent. It proves the palace has modeled the scenario and prepared to act. And if the public ever sees it, the questions will turn brutal. Why Catherine? Why now? And who was being protected or sidelined? That's the stakes. The public starts asking why Catherine, and won't stop. Because why Catherine isn't just about her. It's about trust, authority, and who the monarchy believes can hold the nation steady when uncertainty threatens to crack the illusion of permanence. And just when the palace thinks it can smother the story, the plan's real impact surfaces. William's future is being shaped in real time. This leak doesn't just touch Charles, it touches William, because any Regency plan becomes the blueprint for how the heir is perceived. If Catherine is favoured, it can be read as trust or as necessity. And insiders say William understands the danger, perception can become reality. If the public starts seeing Catherine as the stabilizer, the institution may quietly lean on her more, and that changes the balance inside the marriage, inside the family, and inside the future reign before it even begins. Because William's dilemma isn't only political, it's personal. He has to protect privacy while projecting strength, and those two instincts collide in a way only an heir can understand. If he stays silent, the public imagines uncertainty. If he speaks too much, he confirms the crisis. If he allows Catherine to become the public anchor, he risks turning his wife into the institution's shield, admired, relied upon, and quietly overused. But if he refuses that role for her, he risks looking unprepared. And unprepared is the one label the monarchy cannot afford to carry into a destabilizing moment. Insiders whisper Catherine's role begins expanding in ways that don't look dramatic, but feel structural. She stops being just a supportive partner in the background and becomes an institutional anchor by design, placed where stability is needed, relied upon where calm must be projected, used as proof that the system is intact. And that shift changes the internal balance of power immediately. Because if Catherine is favoured in a Regency blueprint, it signals something uncomfortable. The palace believes she is a safer point of trust than many of the traditional power channels around them. Foreshadowing turns darker with talk of a redistribution of duties. That phrase sounds administrative. It is not. It's the first step in moving weight from one set of shoulders to another, without admitting why. The minute duties redistribute, the public begins to notice patterns: who appears more, who appears less, who is suddenly central to high-stakes moments. And when Catherine becomes more visible in those moments, it creates a narrative that is hard to reverse. She is the stabilizer, the steady hand, the person holding the line while uncertainty grows behind the scenes. That's when the cliffhanger becomes dangerous. William draws a hard line on who can brief about Catherine. Insiders say he understands how easily she can be weaponized, praised into pressure, criticized into controversy, framed into a symbol that others can fight over. He tries to protect her from becoming the battleground of other people's agendas. Because the moment staff and courtiers begin speaking about Catherine as strategy, she stops being a person and becomes a lever. And William, more than anyone, knows what it feels like to be treated like a lever. The emotional stakes deepen because family stress becomes public narrative. The press doesn't just report plans, it interprets them. The public doesn't just watch appearances, it assigns meaning. Catherine being favoured can be twisted into William is weak, or Charles doesn't trust his own line, or the palace is preparing for something worse. And once those stories begin, the institution might lean on Catherine even more to calm the waves, creating a trap where the solution becomes the pressure point. That's the terrifying reality. The next reign's rules are being written early. Before William even ascends, the public begins learning how power moves when the palace is under strain. And Catherine's positioning becomes the headline, the symbol, the proof that the monarchy is adapting. But adaptation always has a price. But the most explosive twist is still ahead, because insiders claim the plan includes a final safeguard that could permanently reshape the monarchy. Here's the part insiders say makes this plan terrifying. It doesn't just fill a gap, it locks a future. The alleged Regency blueprint favours Catherine in a way designed to last beyond one crisis, beyond one headline, by hardening safeguards into protocol. That means the plan isn't only a response, it's a redesign. And when a monarchy redesigns itself under pressure, it leaves winners, it leaves losers, and it leaves scars that never fully heal. A safeguard implies permanent rules, not temporary fixes. It suggests new standards that can't be undone with emotion or tradition. Access and consent standards that formalize what used to be negotiated. Clear lines about who can advise, who can brief, who can influence, who can approach, and under what conditions. And if Catherine's influence becomes structural, it means the palace has decided stability should be built around trust, not simply around rank. That is revolutionary in a system that worships hierarchy. But the backlash risk is immediate. Reform versus overreach narratives. Some will call it modern safeguarding, others will call it power grabbing. Some will say Catherine is being protected, others will say she is being elevated at the expense of others. And in that argument, the institution risks exposing the very thing it tries to hide: how much of monarchy is actually managed through control of proximity. Foreshadowing gets sharper as whispers spread that a second insider may confirm the framework publicly. That's when containment becomes impossible, because once two voices align, the story stops sounding like rumor and starts sounding like structure. And the final cliffhanger lands with a new rumor. Another emergency meeting is being discussed, suggesting escalation. Not because the palace wants drama, but because it fears what happens if it doesn't move fast enough to control the narrative. The consequence is unavoidable. Succession talk shifts from taboo to unavoidable planning. The public begins seeing the monarchy not as a fixed structure, but as a machine with contingency modes, and once people know a machine has contingency modes, they start asking which mode it's in right now. And just when the palace believes it can contain the leak, a new rumor surfaces suggesting this Regency plan wasn't the only secret blueprint being drafted. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.